is, he just says what it's not. So I just want to make the point, tell me if I'm wrong, but when you speak about continuity of consciousness, you're kind of talking around the concept of self, even if you don't mean to, because we tend to attach to self. It's just a point I'm making. It's very difficult to talk about in a positivist mode. There's some danger in it.
Yeah.
And language is limited. So.
Okay, what I would say is that self, to refer to one's personal, let's say personal continuity, even from life to life, can be used legitimately as a conventional designation.
Right.
Or even to indicate, to refer to the continuity of the individual person. So I would say that the empirical self is a reality as the person, but the person is a conditioned phenomenon. And so the word self that's usually sort of persistently rejected by Buddhism is the idea of self as a solid, substantial, continuous entity, an entity that preserves its own identity through a changing process. So that is what is being rejected. Okay, but I don't want to get into the self issue now. We're talking about what can serve as the basis for consciousness in making the transition from life to life.
One thing that occurs to me is that there can be a tendency for fire, like in California or in Florida, when conditions are very, very dry. They anticipate fire. And in the same way, with consciousness, when the body dies, there can be a karmic tendency towards more fire. Just like, because this is widely done and it's very impersonal. But they just know when the conditions are very, very dry and the weather gets hot and there are lightning storms, there will be fire.
Actually, that's a very interesting point.
Actually, it's spontaneous combustion.
So conditions have created the likelihood that fire will continue.
So there's actually a possibility. Now, when I raised that question, what provides the basis for continuity of consciousness, one doesn't find a clear answer in the suttas. And so what you just brought up is a third possibility compared to the two that I had in mind, which is an interesting one, that consciousness goes into a state, call it abeyance or suspension, or like almost a hibernation.
Right. Looking for conditions.
So it's not actually looking because it's not sort of active, but just it's there as a potential. And when the conditions, the right karmic conditions appear, then the consciousness will arise. That's a possibility I didn't think of. But let me first go through the two positions that have emerged within the Buddhist tradition. Okay, one position, this is the sort of orthodox Theravada position, sort of defended by the commentaries based on the Abhidharma. And this is, and several other Buddhist schools also accepted this position, that there is no actual break from one life to the next, but that rebirth takes place instantaneously after death. So one moment there's the death consciousness, person dies, the next moment the rebirth consciousness springs up. And then the life process starts again. And so there's no time, no occasion when consciousness is not in some kind of embodied form, arising and functioning actively. Okay, let me go through both positions first before I take other comments. The other position, which was accepted by some of the other early Buddhist schools, and then sort of developed in Tibetan Buddhism. And this is the idea that there is a period or phase between two existences when consciousness is not yet fully embodied, fully incarnated into a sentient being. but the consciousness is continuing in some kind of, the Pali and Sanskrit uses the expression antarabhava. Antarabhava. Yes, antarabhava. Intermediate state. No, it's antarabhava. Sorry. No, now I remember where you start. Antarabhava. Okay, now, in argument against this position, somebody can quote the sutta that Andrea referred to just a few minutes ago, the sutta that says that anyone should teach or proclaim the passing away and rebirth of consciousness apart from form, apart from feeling, apart from perception, apart from volitions. That, I say, is impossible. We have several suttas like that. So this is what a defender of the intermediate existence can say, that in the intermediate state, consciousness exists, but it doesn't exist alone. It exists together with a subtle body. This would be something like the astral body of the Theosophist. A kind of it's a material body, but very, very subtle, so that we can't see it with our eyes or touch it with our hands. So it's associated with a very subtle material body, and it has feeling, perception, and volitions. So the other aggregates are there, but they're all in this very subtle condition, which is the intermediate state. And so the consciousness in this condition moves around until the appropriate conditions appear on, say, on the earth, and then it will take rebirth into a mother's womb. So that's the possibility. So actually we have three possibilities here. You can found Tracy, you can found a new school of Buddhism based on that. You'll have adherents of the Orthodox Theravada arguing against you, the adherents of Tibetan Buddhism arguing against you, and then you can defend yourself with counter-arguments and similes. Okay, so the three positions: immediate rebirth, right after death, instantaneously. Second position, intermediate state, in which there's a very subtle personality made of the five aggregates, sort of moving around until conditions appear for rebirth to occur. And then the third position, we call it the Tracy Vada, is that consciousness sort of goes into a state of suspension or temporary cessation until the conditions appear, the right karmic conditions, and then it arises again. Okay. You wrote?
The microphone isn't there, I'll try to speak louder. I think Tracy Vada should be a subset of the second position you mentioned, because if there is a latent tendency, it has to exist somewhere. It doesn't exist nowhere, so it has to be based on something. And so it's either the subtle stage or the antarabhava. It has to be somewhere.
There's no it. You're still thinking of a self, to exist or not exist. That's the crux of all this.
Because you're replacing it with a tendency. So where is that tendency lie? Where does this lie?
When conditions are right, it arises. It's like the fire analogy.
Yeah.
The fire blows out, where do you say it goes? That's like a famous question that Tracy's
Yeah, but then you're talking about consciousness.
No, I still see a difference between the two positions. In what we call the Sarvastivada position, or let's call it the intermediate state existence, the consciousness is still there, it's still functioning. Maybe from our human point of view, it's gone into suspension or hibernation. But from its own perspective, this being who has passed away, the being who has passed away is sort of moving around in this astral plane. The being is conscious, aware of things that are going on Earth. It's just that from our point of view, we can't see that being, we can't touch it, can't communicate with it.
But isn't that similar to the Brahmanic idea of Brahma? That there is this great self, we individual derive from that self, and then we return to it when the body disappears.
No, not at all, because it's remaining an individual stream of consciousness, just the way we're individual streams of consciousness.
How is it preserved as an entity?
It's preserved through, it's connected to a body, there's a physical body there.
Here goes the subset of the second position. It has to exist somewhere.
Yeah, it
You won't
exists.
identify it as a unit.
Well, it doesn't have to exist on the same, let's say, the same vibrational frequency that we exist on.
Yeah, so it's Brahma.
No, it doesn't have to go up to Brahma.
So my expect.
Yeah, it can be floating around in a way here. Let me give you some concrete examples of this. These are based on cases. I mean, I don't remember specific examples, but there's a book by Francis Story. He was one of the investigators of rebirth cases. And he used to work together with the professor from University of Virginia, Ian Stevenson. And they investigated rebirth cases together, children or young people who report remembering their earlier life. And what some of the people interviewed say is that they remember their death in the previous life. And what they experience is always the same, occurs in the same way, that they will experience themselves, conscious, first on the deathbed, lying there dying. Then what happens at a certain point, they find the consciousness or their sense of identity floating up to the ceiling, and they're looking down at their body on the deathbed, and they might see their relatives come into the room, maybe call a doctor, they'll see the doctor come in, check the body, then say something to the relatives start weeping, and there they are. They see themselves having the same body, and they're up against the ceiling, looking down and trying to communicate, trying to say, I'm still here, but nobody is responding to them. The relatives are still weeping, and then maybe the next day they'll see their bodies spread out on they call it the bier, is that what it's called? Bier. And they'll see all of the relatives gathering in the room, and they might be trying to communicate. In one case that I read, the dog was barking up at them. And the people were trying to quiet the dog. Somehow the dog sensed the person, but the other relatives couldn't sense the person. And then they'll see them carrying the body out to the cremation ground or the cemetery, burning the body. And then when the body is gone and everything is ended, then they find themselves just moving about, looking at things going on in this world. They can move over great distances just in what seems to be a split second. They don't have a clear idea of how much time is passing until they find a certain couple to whom they're attracted. Then they hang around that couple for some time until a magic moment takes place. Then they feel themselves being drawn into the woman's body, and they've lost awareness of what is taking place after that until they come out again as a human being.
In light of that description,
Okay,
is
take.
there
that implies that your consciousness, I consciousness, even feeling consciousness,
Yeah.
exist without ear, without eye.
No.
Because the body is now defunct.
Yeah, the human body is defunct, but they do have the subtle body. It's not a disembodied consciousness. It's existing. They look down. They see themselves in the same body. And so they have a kind of eye which is able to function. At least, okay, I haven't done any vivisection or dissection under any of the bodies. So I can't speak about how their optic nerve is functioning, what parts of the brain are being activated.
What is I don't know if this is the appropriate time to ask then, by what way, if there are ways by which a normal or by a non-elevated being, for lack of a better word, arhat, I don't know what that word actually means, other than it's a pretty elevated person in consciousness terms maybe, avoiding firm sense of self. I'm using conventional speaking here. What are the what is the way by which such a being that wishes to return and save all sentient beings, what is the pathway by which after death that being routes itself back into sentient beinghood? How is that described? Because that might help me flesh out the picture.
Okay, this isn't described in the early suttas, but this is the way the Mahayana, the Bodhisattva ideal came to be developed in Mahayana Buddhism. Okay, in this account, somebody who aspires to follow the Bodhisattva path makes a vow, or sometimes several vows, which sort of become one of the bases of their spiritual life. And then as they go on cultivating that vow, it gets stronger and stronger. And so maybe not in this life itself, but as they go on, let us say the vow will tend to connect them to situations where they can continue to practice the Dharma. And the vow will tend to be reactivated life after life by meeting with the appropriate conditions. Okay, if they go on cultivating and strengthening that vow and developing all their other spiritual faculties, they can reach a point where, if they wanted, they can achieve liberation. But because of the force of that vow to follow the Bodhisattva path, they're able to come back again and again. Whether they can actually determine the conditions of their own rebirth, or whether it's just that the vow will bring them to favorable conditions. This is something I don't know the clear answer to.
Is that vow also volition?
The vow, of course, is an expression of volition. Yeah. Okay, Tara.
So one thing, how do we reconcile? I think this is where a little bit of confusion comes in when somebody is going through Buddhist teachings. So on one side we say that there is this stream of consciousness that goes through the process of rebirth.
Yeah.
And on the other hand we say there is no body, there is no fixed entity that is taking rebirth.
Yeah.
So how do we reconcile these two things?
Well, the way they're reconciled is through the principle that there's no fixed entity that's going from life to life, but there is the stream of consciousness, there is the stream of experience, And so that stream of experience is what forms the basis for personal identity, and it enables us to identify ourselves with other beings who have lived in the past, who are, we could say, our karmic ancestors, those who have been the home to the stream of consciousness that's presently flowing through us.
So does it mean that the stream of consciousness is not fixed in the sense, for example, if we can take 3 separate sticks and burn, and a fire can be created out of that.
Yeah.
Now the fire was made up of 3 separate sticks, let's say.
Yeah.
So is it possible that human beings are similar to that, and that what I am in this birth, I might not be a result of just me in the last birth, but maybe I am a combination of 2 or 3 different streams of consciousness?
No, I understand it to be that you are the continuation of one stream of consciousness. Of course, you're influenced by other people in the past as well as in the present, but there's only, I think there's only one stream of consciousness flowing through you.
So this is where I really get stuck. So I cannot see the difference between the stream of consciousness and what the Hindus call the Atma, the soul.
Yeah.
What is the real difference?
The difference is that you need...
Why don't you take the microphone? Give him the microphone.
The difference is you need the cause and conditions go through you, and you're slashing and you're clinging to that consciousness based on your past karma, based on your like a gravitational pull that you're attracted to. But if you're consciously aware of this is just a phenomenon. The Atma, the self, doesn't really exist.
Okay, maybe let me try to put this in the way I would understand it. Okay, according to the Buddhist, the Buddhist point of view, like any idea of the self as being a fixed, substantial entity that is our true identity is an expression of clinging. So the most fundamental type of clinging, according to the Buddha, is the clinging to the view of self, the idea of self. So what we have is this stream of consciousness running through us, always changing. And normally when we are seeking the self, the thing that we cling to most as being ourself is the consciousness. And that clinging arises because we haven't been able to examine the consciousness with insight, to see how consciousness is always arising and passing away. But when one sees the arising and passing away of the consciousness, then the clinging to the consciousness falls away. And when the clinging falls away, then the identification of consciousness as being a real self falls away. Okay, I think we'll have to break now for the lunch. Then, if you want to continue, we could continue the discussion after lunch at 12 o'clock. Or a little after 12 o'clock, 12:10, that's it. Okay, so we will do the sharing of the merits. Okay, we'll be handing out the sheets. Okay, then I'll be having the class next week. Next week is September 25th. And please bring the handout that we gave out this week. I didn't get to it today. If you have the book, you just fold it and put it in the book or in a notebook. Then you'll be sure to bring it next week. Okay, so let us end by sharing the merits. Deva Naga Mahitika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Sasanam Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahitika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Desanam Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahitika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Mam Param Etavata Cham Hehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Devanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavata Cham Hehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Bhutanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavata Chamehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Satanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Bhavagupadaya Vijayatako Etantare Satakaya Papanna Rupya Rupicha Sanya Samino Tukha Pamuchantu